A few years ago, one of my friends joined a new religious movement, and it had a very strong change on their personality. And from where they were standing, obviously they were very happy with it. From where lots of other people were standing, it wasn't such a positive change. This, religious group seems quite reactionary and conservative.
In what way?
So traditional roles for women, homosexuality is wrong, and it's so out of character. It seems so strange.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it could be that, well, this is a side of him that you didn't know that he's letting out, and it's a good thing. It's not necessarily bad. It's just because it's different. So it's very confronting to the people around who know Fred in a certain way, and then Fred starts acting differently. You could argue, well, that's because Fred wasn't really being Fred, and now he's found the thing that helps Fred be truly himself. But I'm guessing we're not really talking about that. The things you've brought up are quite worrying. They're not positive.
Any religious movement which has, a fair number of followers is going to have a few of them who become disenchanted and start writing horrible things. But there have been some journalistic, exposures and other things about the organisation that do make it seem slightly, or much less shiny than it might look at first. At first I thought, maybe this is good, maybe this is what he wants, maybe this is, really reacting to himself. But there are things that he says and does where you can just see he's rattled, or it's quite a brittle relationship he has, and he doesn't want to necessarily, he can't bend that far, otherwise.
So if you question anything, he's defensive and he's not able to examine it.
Exactly.
With this, what we're talking about, I would say that anybody, you could say anything about it. I don't think I could ever be offended because, well, first of all, what this is it's not mine. It's not something I own. There's nobody to own it. So it's a bit like somebody insulting the sea or something. It's like the sea can't be insulted. You could try and rip it apart or tear it down, and I would say, fine, that's the viewpoint from where you are, and you're entitled to it.
I mean, the other things that I've heard about this group is that, they're all very friendly while you're in it, but if you want to leave, they can really turn.
Well, that's another big sign, isn't it? Do talk about this in the book. This is freely given by life. First of all, it's not given by a person. Am I giving this to you? No, I'm sharing this with you, and it's not mine to give, it's in you. So I'm merely, I guess the idea is kind of waking up what's already in you. The idea that if you want to leave, I would then be insulted. There's that defensiveness again.
And threaten my development as a personal spirit all my life is, that's...
Well, it wouldn't threaten your development. Psychologically, you might be upset for a while, but...
But no, sorry, I'm saying lots of these organisations will threaten, they'll say, if you leave, you won't get enlightenment.
Okay, so that's the threat, and that plays on the fear of the seeker, because the seeker wants to find enlightenment, and they thought this person or this organisation was the way towards that, and now this person is kind of withholding the offer. I was going to give you enlightenment, but now I'm not. That's wrong for so many reasons. Firstly, they can't give the enlightenment. They can't withhold it. They're not the keepers of it. And I think this is an important point. This is the understanding that there's no one to claim it. So if somebody has had the shift and they're awake, there can be no danger of any abuse happening. Because the energetic source is from the shift. It's from love, essentially. So all the problems that arise in this area are when there are teachers who haven't had the shift. They've had, presumably, in most cases, they've had experiences of this, they've had openings, even awakenings. But as long as the shift hasn't happened, the activity of personality can still come in. It can come in after the shift too, but because the identification has been broken, there can be no identification with what arises. But before the shift, there can still be identification. And as long as you have that, you get the whole circus of the cult thing happening. And then you get the abuse and the messianic trips and all of that, all the trouble comes. These sort of threats like you're not good enough, you're not working hard enough. The idea that it's work is a strange use of the word, but it is true that there is an intensity and a focus that's needed to break that identification. Once again, that focus and that intensity is not really yours. It's life happening that creates and leads to the shift. So it's not like you can say, I'm going to try really hard and I'm going to be really focused, I'm going to be so focused. And I know this happens for a lot of people, and I understand it because it is part of the yearning. They're so desperate that they want to leave suffering of personality. They know that so well that they really want to leave it behind. So their search can be fueled by a kind of intensity, but it can come from personality a bit. But there does have to be an intensity. Because otherwise this is not going to happen. The personality wants to continue its reign. It doesn't want to be deposed. The engagement has to be, well, the phrase is one has to want this like a drowning man wants air. And I definitely think that's true. Because, and you know, there's a reason for it. If you don't want it that bad, the personality will always pull you back. It will always be able to trick you. So the intensity has to be there in order to take you beyond everything that will pull you back. Take you out of your comfort zone, on and on and on, until you leave behind the kind of atmosphere, the force field of the personality. So sometimes gurus will say, you know, if you don't get your act together, you're going to get kicked out, or you're not doing well enough, and you're not trying hard enough. So in the context of what I've just said, you could say, well, there's a reason for that. But as far as I'm concerned, if someone's not intense or focused enough on this, it's just not going to happen. And that's absolutely fine. It's nothing to do with me. It's where the person is at in their life and what their life is about. And if their life isn't about waking up, it isn't about waking up. There'd be no condemnation about it. They would just naturally fall away and say, oh, I tried this weird thing for a while, but it wasn't for me. And it becomes clear after a while who are the people who really have this yearning in their bones.
You know, if one of our viewers was interested in, found a group that, say, talked about non-duality or spirituality and thought it was interesting, again, what sort of early warning signs might you recommend people look out for? I mean, one that's there for me is a strong leader, because that often usually tips over into leader or guru worship, doesn't it?
Well, I think in a sense this role, in some respects, requires a strong leader. I mean, otherwise why are you doing it? If you don't have the facility to represent this well, and if you do represent it well, it will be strong to those who can hear it. So there's nothing wrong with that.
I guess it's nothing wrong with a strong leader, but it's whether they're a strong character or a strong personality, isn't it?
Yes, we can bring it back to, is there personality involved? So a strong charismatic leader with personality involved is a bit of a lethal concoction. And we can see this all the time, not just in these spiritual circles, in political circles, you get your Hitlers and Stalins, and somebody can be really charismatic. And people who are looking for things can be open and vulnerable and be seduced by that charisma. And the danger is that they then start believing everything they say. So this is perhaps a very fundamental thing. Don't believe anything, I would say. As soon as you start believing everything somebody says, you're screwed, really.
So I guess any organisation or religion that says, oh, well, you've got to take that on faith is probably not, at all consistent with this.
As soon as you have faith, you're in the world of religion, and that's a different thing. I think that's what distinguishes religion from this. There's no belief involved in this. Belief actually works against finding this, I would say.
I mean, to a degree, there was an element of belief on my part. Before I had my opening, there was just belief that, you're not a charlatan, I guess.
I would question that. I mean, was that belief or was that a feeling?
I mean, it was based on, 15 years of friendship with you, wasn't it, I guess? Or, so...
Okay, but in those...
So maybe not necessarily belief, but experience.
This is my point. You don't need this belief, but the experience is what informs you. So you had 15 years where apparently I wasn't proving myself to be a total, controlling idiot who was saying things that he didn't live, that it was your experience of me was backed up by your knowledge of how I acted, whatever. So this led to a certain trust, I would imagine,
yes,
building up, which is very different from a belief. Because of your experience of me, you were open to it.
Yes.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Definitely, it wasn't believing in it, but it was, being open, I think would be.
Yeah. Plus, there's another factor here, that what you have experienced since then in openings, you've already had in your life from earlier life. Therefore, when I talked about them, they weren't just an unknown quantity. There was vague memories. When I think back to teachers that I went to for support, that you're drawing on the knowing, really, something inside you that knows. It may not be being lived fully and consciously, but it's almost like somebody would say something and there would be an energetic response to it. And in the book I talk about having this with quotes. I used to go to a bookshop in Covent Garden in London and look at some of the spiritual books, maybe about Buddha or Lao Tzu, and I'd read a quote and it would be the impact on me would be very strong. I'd almost have to sit down and close my eyes and take it in. So what's that about? That's for me, that looking back now, that's something, the part of me that knew was being woken up by that quote. And I think in a way that is the function of the true teacher, that they wake up what is already known but is sleeping in the student. So within that setup, once belief enters and once you have a teacher or a charismatic guru where there's still personality acting out, then you get all the problems. Those are all the ingredients for the problems. A willing, believing, vulnerable, open student and a charismatic teacher who still has personality functioning. Those two together. And that's where cults and movements and gurus get a bad name. There are lots of people who have been drawn into that role who aren't really qualified.
I mean, the interesting thing is that this form of abuse isn't really limited to, or similar forms of abuse are not limited to, newer religious groups or organisations. It's in the older ones or more traditional ones as well. All sorts of misbehaviour, not just sexual, is coming out.
Oh, yeah.
In Christian and other denominations.
These are personality traits, you could say, from the shadow, where there's a need to control. So the role of a teacher gives that need a perfect place to be played out. Need to control people, perhaps a need to be superior to people. They often go together. That can lead to abuse of those people. So that's the teacher's side. And from the student's side, there's a vulnerability because they're open to this person because they appear to know more, and they may know more than them about these subjects. They probably do. But just because they know more about this subject doesn't mean they're awake and they're free of their personalities. It means they've had some experiences. They may express them really well. They may have charisma, but that's not the same as being awake. Because as soon as a shift has happened, any idea of abuse and controlling of other people becomes impossible.
Why is it impossible once you're awake?
Because you're not governed anymore by the personality and its needs and its patterns and its shadow. like in the garden at the moment, we've got ivy that is overgrown and we want to get rid of. And a good way of doing it is to cut the root. And then everything above it just dies off. And that's what happens if you cut the root of the personality. All the branches, the twisted, mangled stems, and all of it is no longer alive.
Being fed.
It's not being fed, so it dies. And that's what happens in the Shiv.